Good Thursday afternoon. It is September 14th. Important update to let you know about in terms of Jose. No longer a hurricane. Been downgraded as of the 11 o'clock advisory to a tropical storm. That's notable. First time this month that we have not had a hurricane in the Atlantic. Been very, very busy out there. So finally a little bit of a quiet session. Although it's not going to last too long. As we look here at what's going on in the next few days with the forecast track, it is expected to finally get a move on here after it completed its clockwise loop out there south of Bermuda, and it gets a move on to the north. Once that happens, it's going to encounter some warmer ocean waters and also conditions that aren't going to be as terrible as they're in right now. Wind shear will go down. Moisture in the air will go up, and that'll likely lead to some strengthening, moderate strengthening, up to a Category 1 storm possibly by early next week. As it tracks north, that cone of uncertainty grows and actually encompasses parts of the Outer Banks of North Carolina on its far western fringe. Now's a good time to kind of explain what you're looking at here. We've talked about the cone of uncertainty numerous times, but really what is it? Well, the bottom part of the cone is the actual position right now of Jose. From that point outwards, the cone gets larger and larger, and that really shows that the margin of error or the growth of uncertainty gets bigger each day you go out into the future, eventually getting out to day 5, which is as far out as the Hurricane Center forecast goes. You're getting up to 220 miles in either direction from this center line that the center of the storm could track. Now, areas outside of this cone in either direction aren't immune from any sort of impacts from a storm because this cone of uncertainty does not encompass the size of the actual storm. So that's what you got to take note of there. As we go farther out in the future, the margin of error grows considerably. Here's how it looks on satellite imagery. It's still got a core of some pretty good convection or thunderstorm activity, but just south of the actual center, thanks to that wind shear that really has just been relentless over the past couple of days, but some very cold top clouds there. We're looking at the infrared imagery that gives us a sense of the temperatures of the clouds. The whiter, the higher up in the atmosphere they are, therefore colder tops, meaning that thunderstorm activity still generally mature, but it's also encountering some very dry air. We switch up to the water vapor imagery on the satellite now, and this is a whole plume of some dry air here, really inhibiting any growth in terms of this system right now, which is why it has been downgraded to that tropical storm. Wind shear has been a big problem coming in out of the northwest, blowing the storm tops off to the south of the actual center, and it's still in an area, at least for the next 24 hours, that's going to see moderate to high wind shear before it moves into an area that'll be a little bit better off for it to maybe re-strengthen over to a Category 1 hurricane by the end of the weekend and early next week. Something cool I saw here, as Jose was moving in that loop, it was actually moving over its own wake or its upwelling. We've talked about that before with hurricanes. They stir up cooler water below the surface and mixes it to the surface, and that kind of releases the heat energy there. So it's been moving over its wake, and you could see that here on the ocean surface temperatures. In fact, outside of this area of wake, temperatures still in the mid-80s in terms of the ocean temperatures, but within its wake, down to around 80, 81. Minimal temperatures usually for hurricane growth and development, around 80 or so. Above that, some real good convection gets going or thunderstorm activity thanks to the evaporation off the ocean surface, and it just leads to a whole lot of good growth for hurricanes, but just not the case right now as it's moving over its own wake. So let's talk models now. We're looking at the GFS ensemble. Again, it's the same model, run 20 times with different initial settings to kind of offer a different outcome. Here's how they all look here as we go through the next couple of days. Really getting pretty quickly a big deviation from the center there. Large uncertainty as it goes off to the west, eventually northwest, and eventually north and northeast. Notice that spread getting up to around 600, 700 miles by the time it gets parallel the Virginia coastline. Here's all the other computer models showing pretty much the similar thing that turn north. How far east or west it goes will certainly determine if there's any impacts felt on the eastern seaboard. Now, there are 2 other systems to talk about. Yeah, we're just coming off the peak of hurricane season and the Cape Verde hurricane season, where in September at least we see a lot of the development happen. 2 separate areas to watch here. One, the farthest off towards the west, although still way out in the eastern Atlantic, has about a 60% chance of developing into a named tropical system within 5 days. One right behind it, looking a little healthier on satellite imagery coming off the coast of Africa, has a 40% chance. Now, the 2 next names that are up are Lee and Maria. Now, I want to show you some of the models for those particular waves. Now, you're looking at something here titled Tropical Wave Invest 96L. What is that? Well, before we give a storm a name, like a tropical storm, a tropical depression, a hurricane, it gets a number name, an invest, meaning they are investigating a certain number. So it starts with a 9, and at the beginning of the season, it goes 90, and it goes all the way up to 99. Once that hits 99, it goes back to 90, and the L is actually an abbreviated version. Usually is AL, meaning Atlantic. If it was to be in the Pacific, it would say EP at the end for Eastern Pacific. So that's what you're looking at there, little clarification. But here's the models on 96L. Again, that was the one farthest to the west, but still way out in the Eastern Atlantic. 2 models putting it heading towards the Leeward Islands, way out in the future by the time we get to not this Sunday, but the Sunday beyond that. So a lot of time between now and then, but that's going to be one to watch. And here's the one right behind, that 97L. Moving in general the same direction, but maybe tracking a little bit farther to the north there. Remember that the 2 names that are next up are going to be Lee and Maria. We've already had 11 named storms this season so far, so already halfway through the list there. I also want to reiterate where September hurricane paths usually originate, the Cape Verde Islands, which is where we see those 2 areas of concern. And what steers it is the Bermuda high, the Azores high, and the intensity of that high and the placement. When it's rather weak and off towards the east, we're going to see that general steering to the west, and then it loops out to sea, not an issue. But if that area of high pressure is a little bit farther to the west, a little bit stronger, it'll push that storm farther west, and eventually taking that turn somewhere near the east coast. If this high pressure is just huge and very, very strong, it'll even suppress it farther and push it into the Gulf of Mexico. So that's all things we're going to take into account here, watching those 2 areas of concern over the next 5 to 11 days. So a lot of time between now and then to watch it. All right, that's all I got to say for today. Join the conversation on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Meteorologist Tim Pandajis, or on Twitter, 13 Tim Pandajis. Have a great afternoon.